Have you ever wondered what really happens when everything you call me just disappears? Not physical disappearance, but the silent collapse of identity. When masks fall, certainties crumble, and what remains is emptiness, or is it the whole? Alan Watts used to say that humanity's greatest mistake is believing we are separate from life, that we are isolated islands floating in a sea of chaos. But what if this sense of separation is just an illusion? What if death, instead of a period, is just a comma, a return to the place we never truly left? From a young age, we learn to see ourselves as distinct entities. This is my body, this is my name, this is my story. But Watts, with his almost poetic way of seeing existence, invites us to break with this narrative. According to him, there is no you disconnected from the world, nature, or the universe. You are the universe, experiencing yourself in human form for a brief moment. And perhaps that's why we fear death so much, because we believe deep down that it represents the end of who we are, the end of individuality. But the truth is that this fear stems precisely from the illusion that we are separate from everything that exists. Watts saw death not as an abyss, but as a wave returning to the ocean. And life would be the wave momentarily raised, with form, with a name, with a personality, but still made of the same seawater. You were never just a body. You were never just a mind. You were never just the version others see. There is something in you that goes beyond time, beyond space, beyond form, something that cannot be touched, nor explained, but can be felt when you silence the noise of the ego and allow yourself to simply be. The idea of separation is convenient for the modern world. It serves to maintain fear, control, and haste. But inside you, deep down, when night falls and all is still, there is a voice that whispers, you are part of something bigger. You have never been alone. It is in this whisper that lies the truth Watts so desperately sought to convey. Death is merely the end of illusion. There is no loss. There is no loneliness. Only transformation. Only return. And this return isn't something that happens only with your last breath. It can happen now, here, in this very moment. Just look within and remember, what you seek outside is already there within. When we stop resisting impermanence and begin to see life as a continuous flow, without absolute beginnings or endings, something changes. Anxiety loses its strength, fear weakens, and life, with all its complexity, begins to make sense. You're not falling into the void, you're coming home. And it is about this journey back to the whole that we will talk from now on. Because when you understand that death isn't the end, but merely a transition, something inside you begins to transform. That internal rigidity, the attachment to your stories, your labels, your supposedly fixed identity, begins to give way. And then a freedom emerges that you may never have truly experienced. Alan Watts didn't talk about death as something tragic. For him, death was a change of phase, like the seasons. Autumn doesn't cry when it loses its leaves. He understands that only then can spring blossom. The big issue is that we as human beings resist the idea of change. We create routines, build mental and emotional structures, and cling to them as if they were permanent. But nothing is. And deep down, death only seems frightening to us because it forces us to face this head-on. The hidden truth that everything is always changing. It's curious how we avoid this topic as if talking about it would bring bad luck. But death is present all the time. Not only in the bodies that stop breathing, but also in the old versions of ourselves we leave behind. There's a kind of death that happens silently, every day, when you say no to something that once dominated you, when you choose a new path, even without guarantee of success, when you abandon a limited mindset and decide to open yourself to uncertainty. This is the death of the ego, the death that liberates. Watts used to say that to be reborn, the ego must die. And this isn't poetry. It's experience. It's in the collapse of certainties, in the downfall of the characters you play, that something authentic emerges, something lighter, more truthful. You begin to realize that you don't need to control everything. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to defend yourself constantly. Because who you are, they cannot be threatened. The ego builds a character, but the soul wants to live the truth. And the truth is, you are a flux. A constant dance between what dies and what is born within you. This may seem daunting at first, but in practice it is the source of your deepest transformation. Because every ending contains a new beginning. Every loss makes room for something new. Every time a part of you dies, another part awakens. And then, life becomes a sequence of small deaths and rebirths. You realize you don't have to wait for a crisis to change, or a trauma, or an external sign, because you can die, symbolically, right now. Die to fear, to the past, to the need for control. Die to the weight of should be and simply be who you are, here in this moment. Physical death, according to Watts, is just another of these transitions. The final leap, the end of form, but not of essence. You don't disappear, you dissolve, like a drop, rejoining the ocean. There's no loss in this, there's return, and this changes everything. It changes the way you look at life. It changes the impact of your decisions. It changes the quality of your presence. When you stop seeing death as an enemy, you begin to live with more courage, because you understand that you're not here to win a game, but to play with dedication. Each choice takes on new value, not for fear of ending, but for the beauty of being present. Each moment becomes sacred, not for how long it lasts, but for what it reveals. And perhaps the greatest revelation is this: you were never the character. You are the space where it happens. You are the stage, the consciousness behind it all. And this consciousness doesn't begin or end. It simply changes expression, its form, its cycle. So yes, death may be the end of one story, but it's also the birth of another. And this new story doesn't have to wait. It begins when you decide to let go, when you accept that there's power in letting go, that control is a burden, and that truly living is an act of trust. Now take a deep breath, because the next turn may happen even deeper within you. Because at this point in the journey, something inevitable begins to happen. You don't just intellectually understand what Alan Watts was saying. You begin to feel as if words ceased to be ideas and became pulses within your chest. And that's when everything changes. You begin to realize that dying, in the deepest sense, is a privilege. It's the chance to shed the layers that no longer serve you, the masks you didn't even realize you were wearing, the walls you built around your heart to try to protect yourself from pain, but which, deep down, also kept you from love, from connection, from truth. How many times have you held on to an old version of yourself simply for fear of disappearing? How many decisions have you postponed because the end seemed too scary? But what dies when you change isn't you. It's only what no longer makes sense. It's only what has served its purpose. Like a leaf that falls, like the skin the body sheds to grow. Watts spoke of surrender as wisdom, and this seems contradictory in a world where you've been taught that winning is resisting, that growing is arming yourself, that living is fighting. But sometimes the real leap happens when you stop fighting the flow and decide to surrender. When you understand that you're not here to force existence to fit your mold, you're here to dance with it, to feel, to adjust, to trust. And this surrender, this symbolic death, brings an almost painful, yet profoundly liberating clarity. You look at the situations in your life and begin to see behind the scenes. What was once just confusion now reveals patterns, cycles, invitations. Each ending that hurt you was perhaps pushing you closer to who you truly are. Each fall was a push from life saying, you don't need this anymore. And even though you resisted, in fear, in anger, in pain, something inside you knew you had to die in order to live. The truth is, the more you resist the death of your old self, the heavier life becomes. Because you weren't born to carry everything. Not all plans will come true. Not all people will stay. Not all paths are yours. And that's okay. Because when you understand this, you begin to walk lighter, to make more informed choices, to say yes more to who you're becoming, and no more to everything that drags you back to who you once were. This is real motivation, not the kind that forces you to be more, do more, achieve more, but the motivation that comes from within, that stems from the relief of finally being you. No more pretending, no more winning a war that was never yours. You don't have to be strong all the time, you just have to be honest with yourself. And honesty sometimes hurts, because it requires you to courageously look at the parts you'd rather hide. But that's the price of freedom, of transformation, of rebirth. And there's no liberation without this immersion, without this necessary collapse of the old. That's why Watts said, die before you die. Because true death is to continue living as if you were only what the world taught you to be. Only you're not. You are the consciousness behind it all. the silent space where all change happens. And in this space, everything can begin again, everything can be recreated, everything can be reinvented. There's nothing more powerful than realizing you can be reborn now, in this instant. All it takes is a decision, an internal choice, and enough that transforms into a yes to something new. And this newness doesn't always come with clarity. Sometimes it comes with emptiness, with silence, with confusion. But this is the fertile soil where the new version of you will grow. And if growing up hurts too, so be it. Because the pain of growing up is 1,000 times lighter than the weight of staying where you no longer fit. The truth is that each moment is a reincarnation of the now. You don't need to wait for everything to change on the outside. What needs to die is within, and what needs to be born, too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this inner transformation that begins when we decide to stop resisting. Because the next step of this journey reveals something even more essential, something that can definitively change the way you see your own existence. And when you decide to stop resisting, it doesn't mean giving up. Indeed, means trusting that there is a greater intelligence guiding this flow, that even when everything seems to be falling apart, there is a purpose behind the collapse. Alan Watts said that life is a cosmic game, and that you never lose, you just change phases. This perspective completely changes how we face the end of things, because if everything is a cycle, then each ending is actually the gateway to something new. But this newness doesn't arrive magically. It requires space, and that's why death, both physical and symbolic, is so essential. It clears the ground, it breaks down structures, it uproots old ones, and sometimes it feels brutal, uncomfortable. But discomfort is also a sign that something inside you is being realigned. Look back and realize, how many times in your life have you only begun to find yourself after losing something or someone? How many versions of yourself were born only after dark nights, breakups, and falls you thought you couldn't handle? The end isn't a punishment, it's a calling. And ignoring this calling is what makes us live a life of repetition, of silent dissatisfaction, of movements that seem to move forward but are stagnant inside. Watts challenges us to look at this process with new eyes. He didn't want us to simply understand impermanence, he wanted us to live from it, because impermanence isn't a threat, it's permission. Permission to change, to leave scenes that have already ended, even if you're still on stage, to abandon a script that wasn't written by your soul. And when you begin to live with this awareness, something very powerful happens. Fear loses its grip on you, because the fear of death, at its core, is the fear of not having truly lived. It's the fear of reaching the end and realizing you spent too much time trying to survive when you could be living deeply, with intention, with presence. You start to wonder, how many decisions have I made trying to avoid the end? How many times have I failed to say what I felt, to risk what I wanted, to change what hurt, just because I was afraid of losing what I knew? But the familiar is no guarantee of peace. Often it's just the comfort of prison. And every prison, no matter how beautiful it seems, steals something sacred, your ability to feel alive. That's why dying before dying isn't just a pretty phrase. It's a direct invitation to freedom, an invitation to step out of the armor and into the now, a now that doesn't demand perfection, but rather presence. A now that doesn't want you to know everything, but rather to surrender to what and. Because surrender, as Watts said, is the ultimate act of trust. And trusting is living without holding life in your hands. When you live with your hands open, anything can pass through you. Pain, love, loss, encounters. Nothing needs to be held back by force. And it is in this state that true rebirth happens, not as a grand event, but as something subtle, almost imperceptible, a changing gaze, a lighter breath, a silence that once disturbed now welcomes. You realize you're no longer running from death. You're dancing with it, because it shows you what truly matters. It helps you let go of what's superfluous and value what's essential. Every hug becomes deeper, every conversation more sincere, every gesture more authentic, and even in the face of uncertainty, you begin to walk with a new kind of courage, a courage that needs no proof, that isn't born of brute force, but of lucid surrender. The courage to live with your heart exposed, even knowing it might break, because you understand there is no rebirth without death, and there is no full life without surrender. And it's curious to think that, even knowing that everything changes, we still cling so tightly to what no longer pulses. Relationships, routines, roles we play for fear of disappointment or fear of facing the emptiness that would come after. But emptiness, despite its fame, is not an enemy. Alan Watts used to say that emptiness is fertile, that it is in the space between one note and the next that music breathes. It is in the silence that the next word is born. So why are we so resistant to silence? Why are we so afraid to stop, to let go, to face who we are when we're no longer trying to be anything else? Perhaps because we've been conditioned to believe that we're only valuable when we're doing, producing, being useful. But the soul doesn't operate like that. It doesn't measure value by performance. It flourishes in presence, in truth, in stillness. That's why often when everything falls apart, what's really falling isn't you. It's the character. It's the theater. And the fall may hurt, but what remains afterward is more real, more naked, more essential. You begin to recognize there on that ground where before there was only fear, the seed of your freedom. Because when there's nowhere left to run, that's where you finally comes to your senses. Watts said that life should not be lived as a journey with a destination, but as a dance. And no one dances in a hurry to arrive. Dance exists for the experience of movement itself, for the pleasure of feeling the body surrender to the rhythm. Death, then, would not be the end of the dance. It would be merely a pause, a waiting beat before a new melody begins. But to dance with life, you have to allow yourself to move with it. And that means accepting that we have no control over almost anything, that trying to keep everything in order is exhausting and ultimately illusory. Control is the ego's last attachment and also the first to fall when you awaken. And this is what awakening is. It's looking at everything that has fallen apart and realizing that the essential was never at risk. It's seeing that what you lost was exactly what no longer took you anywhere. It's realizing that dying, in the symbolic sense, is just the natural process of shedding the old skin so the new can breathe. You no longer need to carry the past as if it defined your destiny. You no longer need to follow old maps drawn out of fear. Every moment offers you the chance to be reborn, to change your path, to choose differently. It doesn't matter how many times you've fallen, how many times you've lost yourself, or how many versions of yourself have been buried by time. The now is fertile, the now is real. And within this now there is a force that doesn't need to shout to be felt. It doesn't impose itself. It invites. It doesn't force. It whispers. And if you have the courage to be silent for a moment, you will hear. You will feel. You will remember that you don't need to reinvent yourself externally when everything you need is already germinating within. That's why Watts told us, so lightly, you are a function of the universe, not a stranger thrown here by accident. And when that phrase finally sinks in, not as theory, but as experience, fear dissolves, because there's nothing left to fear when you realize that life was never against you. It was just waiting for you to stop fighting it. Life wants to transform you, and every true transformation requires a death of everything you've overcome, of everything you no longer are, but still try to hold on to. And maybe, just maybe, now is the time to let it all go. And when everything you thought you were starts to fall apart, what's left? This is the question most people avoid, because facing that answer requires more than courage. It requires presence. It requires surrender. It requires an honesty few are willing to access. But it is in this space, stripped of armor, that true transformation happens. Alan Watts didn't talk about spirituality as something distant, unattainable, or overly mystical. He spoke as if looking you in the eye and saying, "You are not what you think. You are what observes your thoughts." And that changes everything, because thinking can be deceptive. It creates stories, fears, expectations, and constructs entire identities based on things that were never truly you. But there's something in you that predates all of that, something that just and effortless, needless to define. This something is what remains when the character dies. It's what remains when the roles dissolve. It's what breathes, even when everything else falls apart. And when you touch that part of yourself, even if only for a brief moment, the search ceases. Not because you found all the answers, but because you finally realize that perhaps there never was a real question. Life doesn't require you to understand everything. It requires you to live wholeheartedly, to be whole in every step, even without knowing the path. This state of presence, of surrender, is what connects us to our essence, not that idealized, clean, evolved essence, but the real essence, Imperfect, sometimes confused, but completely alive. And it is this life that Watts wanted to remind us exists within us. Not a life that begins at birth and ends at death, but a life that crosses all these experiences like a river that never stops flowing. Death, then, wouldn't be an interruption. It would be a bend in the river, a change of direction, not the end of the journey. And this perspective has a profound impact on how we live in the present. Because if you truly understand that death is merely a transformation, then life becomes a much more precious gift. Not in the sense of rushing or trying to seize every second with anxiety, but in the sense of savoring each instant deeply. You begin to live as someone who dances with time, not as someone who fights against it. And in this dance, you learn to let go. You learn to let go. People, versions, certainties, plans. You learn that letting go isn't losing. It's trusting. Trusting that everything essential will remain, and that what leaves has already accomplished what it had to accomplish. And this brings lightness, because the weight we carry isn't in the things themselves. It's in attachment. Attachment to what should have been, to what already was, to what we wish would continue. But nature doesn't cling. The tree doesn't try to stop its leaves from falling. The river doesn't reject the stones in its path. Life flows. And when you align with this flow, even pain takes on a new flavor. They don't disappear, but they stop being obstacles and become passages, portals, experiences that shape you. Because living intensely isn't the same as living without pain. Living intensely means allowing yourself to feel everything fully. It means not numbing yourself. It means not running away. It means looking within even when everything inside you wants to look outside. Watts said that what you fear most deeply isn't death, it's the unknown. But the unknown is also the cradle of all that's possible. The void you avoid is the very space where creativity, truth, and freedom reside. There is no birth without this space. There is no rebirth without this prior collapse. And if you allow yourself to cross this space, not as someone running to escape, but as someone surrendering to cross, then something new will emerge. A new outlook, a new attitude toward life, a new presence, a new peace. And if something in you has remembered all of this, even if silently, then this conversation has already been worthwhile. Because deep down, what we seek isn't more information, it's reconnection. With life, with the present, with who we truly are beneath it all. If this video touched you in any way, if it sparked a spark within you, if it made you reflect, take advantage and subscribe to the channel. That's what we do here. Explore ideas that aren't just for understanding with the mind, but for feeling with the heart. And comment below, that message was for me, just so I know you've stayed with me this far, on this deeper dive. Oh, and if you want to continue this journey, there's a video right here that complements everything we talked about today. Click and stay with me there.